Check 1, 2. Check it out.
Yep, we're good to go anytime we're rolling.
Okay.
Perfect, thanks. Dude, it is a pleasure to speak to you again. Welcome back to the World Cafe.
Thanks very much for having me. Always good to be here.
Oh, man. So, first off, what's the Atlas Underground?
The Atlas Underground is a solo record of mine, but it's a collaborative album in which I tried to forge a sonic conspiracy of artists of diverse genres, diverse ethnicities, diverse genders, and diverse ages to boldly try to make a new genre of rock and roll. One that combines my Marshall Stack electric guitar analog fury with huge EDM drops and some of the electronic wizardry of 2018. The idea being like, let's make a record that's a Trojan horse in this day and age, both politically and guitar playing wise, to light the fire. The lyrical theme that runs through the record is very, very important. One of the cornerstones of making this record was to tell social justice ghost stories.
Social justice ghost
Yes,
stories.
and the idea that the heroes, martyrs, and fallen of the past can influence the struggles of the present and hopefully light a bonfire under this generation to create a more just and humane future.
That's a heck of a mantra.
That's, we're going for it. Let's. We've come this far. Let's aim high.
Yeah. Well, you have so many guests when you talk about the diversity of this album. It's incredible, the guests that you have from K-Flay to Portugal the Man, Bass Nectar, Killer Mike,
Yeah.
Wu-Tang Clan.
Yeah.
One of the artists that I want to talk about, though, is kind of a surprise to me because I would not have expected a collaboration with Marcus Mumford of Mumford and Sons. How did you guys collaborate on that song?
Well, I've made 4 records under the name The Night Watchman of folk music Americana. I'm a huge fan of Mumford & Sons, and Marcus is another rock dad like myself. So we've torn up the East Village a few times too. So we have some of our tastes intersect. But he just has a tremendous voice and is a great songwriter. And when I was making a wish list for this record, he was high on that list. We actually wrote that song in a very interesting way. He was in England, I was in Los Angeles, and so with the time difference, he would put his kids to bed and then come to the Skype, and then I would drop my kids off at school and then come to the Skype. And we'd get out our acoustic guitars like in our rock dad bathrobes and wrote that song together.
So you wrote the song together while managing the life of being a parent.
Yeah, in between parenting.
You call this music the Hendrix of now. What does that mean?
Well, the idea it's not a psychedelic blues rock explosion. How I view Hendrix, that people have already made that record.
Right.
I wanted to make a record that was breaking new ground. And I think there's 3 component parts to Hendrix that I was aiming for. One is it has to have otherworldly guitar playing, outside the box guitar playing. 2 is one of the reasons Hendrix didn't just dress cool and light his guitars on fire. Hendrix had songs on the radio, from Foxy Lady to Crosstown Traffic.
Like hits.
To when he had hits that inflicted his guitar vision on an unsuspecting world. And then 3rd is the milieu in which Hendrix, lived was blues rock, and now it's a world of electronic beats. So without compromising one iota on the guitar playing or the politics of this music, I wanted to aim to make a record that was very much felt like it was of the present.
It's so curious because one of Rage Against the Machine's biggest statements was not a political one. Yeah. It was something that you would find on the liner notes, and it said all sounds were made by vocals, guitar, drums, and bass. You've just made an electronic album. There's a lot more of that.
Right, exactly. Because throughout my career, like the guitar sounds that I've made have not always sounded like traditional traditional guitar.
So is that actually, that's a great question. Was that line more meant of bravado in the sense that people listening to the Rage record were thinking?
Absolutely, because people didn't recognize, when we'd play shows and stuff, people would think that there was samples or there was a keyboard behind a curtain when all that stuff, or a lot of that stuff was being played on the guitar. But I've made 16 records like that. This is the 17th. And with this, I was trying to forge this new alloy of these different kinds of metals put together where often the sounds blend, where you don't know where the analog Marshall Stack electric guitar begins and some of the electronic elements take over.
Yeah, and particularly on this record, there are so many places where the signature Tom Morello sound can be heard, and it's like very front and clear. But there are a lot of parts where it's hiding. It's not like is that a guitar making that? Is that a keyboard making that?
Right. I mean, that's good. I mean, that's some of those. Sometimes it is a guitar, and sometimes it is a keyboard, and you should be guessing.
Well, and another thing that's great about it is you take musicians, like we mentioned some of the high profile guests. Like something like only A-list pop stars or maybe Coldplay can get. You have all of these incredible guests, and you you use them to interesting effect. In particular, Gary Clark Jr., who is an incredible guitarist and vocalist. On Where It's At Ain't What It Is,
Correct.
you use his voice and guitar to interesting effect.
Right.
Why did you want to pair Gary Clark Jr. with these very modern, dancey sounds?
Sure. Well, I mean, the obvious thing would be to have Gary Clark Jr. and I doing some sort of blues off. So basically, he came to my house and we did that for 3.5 hours. We just had a jam. Well, he sang stuff. We exchanged some lyrics. We just played and traded licks for 3.5 hours. Then I boiled it down to 3.5 minutes and recontextualized it in a way that was, to me, feels like when I'm happiest as an artist and a guitar player is when I'm challenging myself, when it's something that doesn't feel safe. When Rage Against the Machine was formed with a sort of a neo-Marxist, multi-ethnic punk rap metal hybrid, that was not, like a formula for commercial success.
Nobody was doing that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then when three of us paired with Chris Cornell, there were sort of two opposing camps in that. When I did a Dylan in reverse at Newport by putting down the electric guitar and playing folk music for 4 albums, Americana records, and now I really love getting outside of a safety zone and challenging myself. So Gary was down for that. And here's the way I look at it: if mine and Gary's guitar playing is kind of the Ansel Adams black and white, crystal clear photograph, this record is the smashed Picasso version. It's recognizable, but you hear it differently.
Next up, I want to talk about Every Step That I Take, featuring Portugal the Man. There's a unique connection to that song with one of your former members. You played with Chris Cornell in Audio Slave for several years, and he died by suicide in 2017. And you talk about this actually during your live performances with the Atlas Underground as you're performing now. I'm sure it must have been tough to address, but can you talk about how that song connects to Chris and how it does for a very good cause?
On this song, we're partnering with an organization called SAVE, which is a suicide prevention and sort of mental health awareness organization. And Chris's death was so tragic, and if in some way, we wanted to find some way on this record to connect in a way and perhaps help people as a way of extending Chris's legacy and trying to find some silver lining. And if by directing people to this organization called SAVE via the song Every Step That I Take, we can help sort of take the stigma away from depression, mental health issues, and help someone who may be in a dire need. You can always just realize that friends, family, loved ones, and professionals are there to help you. If you break your arm, you go to the doctor to have it fixed. But if people have sort of mental issues, they feel less inclined to do so because of societal stigma, and hopefully we can overcome that. And if this song can help in that regard, then it's been a good day at the office.
Yeah. What do you think? Why do you think it's been more of a struggle with musicians, particularly in the last few years? I mean, with whether it be guys at Chester Bennington or Bob Welch of Fleetwood Mac.
Sure. I couldn't. That I don't know. As someone who doesn't suffer from sort of depression or addiction issues, I can't see through those eyes. Mm-hmm. But I do recognize that it should not be something that is swept in the shadows or under the carpet, and that we should sort of all lovingly reach out together to try to help people who need help and to let them know that there's nothing wrong with feeling wrong.
Yeah, no, I think you kind of need to, embrace it and not be afraid to talk about it. Yeah. Tom Morello is our guest. We're talking about his new album, and one other thing about that, during the tour, you've done a lot of storytelling from the stage, which I think is just a very cool way to do the show. But you sort of talk about Chris, and you talk about a song that you wrote for him, "The Garden of Gethsemane." Yeah, can you tell us what you sort of tell the audience?
Sure. I mean, it was during a sort of a not great period in the early part of Audio Slave where Chris had been missing for some time. We didn't know where he was. We were very concerned about him. And in the middle of the night, he texted me some very cryptic couplet, which was, if you swallow the coin from the wishing well, your dreams will come true in heaven or hell. And I thought, well, that's not great.
That's heavy. Yeah, it's like
that's not great. I'm like, how are you? Where are you? You need any help? And he's texted me back that. So the next day, I wrote this song, "Garden of Gethsemane," which is, of course, in the New Testament where Jesus had his moment of doubt, and it's a song that I play at the shows to for my buddy Chris.
You've worked with such a diverse group of people, as we've just talked about, whether it be Street Sweeper Social Club or Audio Slave or your own work, but you've also worked with some very, very high-profile musicians that as the contributing host of World Cafe, I can't not ask you about the boss and Bruce. It's sort of kind of part and parcel of being here.
Sure.
How did you end up touring with the E Street Band? Let's start there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, like I consider myself so fortunate. Like the front men I've worked with have been Zach De La Rocha, Chris Cornell, Chuck D, Be Real, and Bruce Springsteen. Sort of a veritable like Mount Rushmore of awesomeness of front men and lyricists and writers. But anyway, so Bruce, I was a huge fan of Bruce. I kind of came to Bruce later, but became a really huge fan. And I will say to this day, he's the only friend that I have that I subscribe to 2 fanzines about, and who I once chased down Sunset Boulevard trying to kiss his head. So it's a very, it was always sort of hard to view Bruce as a peer.
So you have you as a musical hero to a lot of people have your own musical heroes, and the boss is one of them.
Absolutely, very high on that list. So we'd been friends for about 8 years before we ever played together, and he invited me to. Rage Against the Machine covered his song "The Ghost of Tom Joad." Bruce's is kind of a acoustic minor key ballad. The Rage one was a very sort of Sabbath-esque, scorched earth song, and when Bruce asked me to play with him, we decided to do a version of Tom Joad that he concocted that was somewhere in the middle. It was like an electrified version of his album one, and he provided me with like 82 bars to solo in that thing. And when we did it for the first time in Anaheim in 2008, 10 years ago, something very, very magical happened. I've never been more nervous in a professional capacity than maybe like my first gig I ever played, than stepping on stage with the E Street Band to rock that. And it went great. And over the course of the next 6 years, we played together on and off for quite a bit.
How many songs did you have to learn for that?
Well, yeah. Well, at first it was like one song at a time. But when Little Steven was away doing his show Lilyhammer, I stepped in for him for an Australian tour, and I learned prior to the tour about 250 songs, and then 250 songs, yeah, and then still was often thrown many more songs. Like the last U.S. tour I did with them, we played 34 shows, and in 34 shows played 182 different songs. It's boggling.
That's boggling. Just boggling. Like as a guest, that's very hard, but also as a band, that's incredible too.
It's boggling.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really have that kind of natural skill set of like. There's some people who are kind of human jukeboxes who can intuit, a Creedence song or this song or whatever. I'm not that, but I had to learn that skill or die trying.
Or be on stage for 4 hours while that's happening. Yeah. There is a video that went viral earlier in the year of a gentleman who's driving in California, and he's experiencing Rage Against the Machine's 1992 self-titled debut for the very first time. What do you think in 2018 makes it so vital to people who've never heard it before?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, it's a rocking band. I mean, while there's the intensity of the message is at the forefront and clearly was affecting our guy there. If Rage Against the Machine were just a lecture at a podium, it wouldn't have that sort of visceral impact. So there's it's a band, like Tim and Brad are, in my view, the best rhythm section since Led Zeppelin. And I play guitar in a hard and unconventional way. Then there's Zach's incredible conviction, which speaks to the issues of 2018, perhaps even more importantly than it did when they were written during the Bill Clinton administration, And so when that guy gets turned onto the music, it's a nice reminder of just how hard that band rocks in a multiplicity of ways.
Yeah, it's odd because you think it's funny you compare those guys to Zeppelin, and you worked with Public Enemy. I mean, in the sense you worked with Chuck D, and those are some of the only artists that you can think that have albums that are 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, and you hear it and it still sounds dangerous.
Yeah,
and I think was that kind of the goal with this album is to make something that's dangerous.
Certainly, with the Atlas Underground record, I wanted to make something that was absolutely uncompromising in that regard and challenge conventions both musically and politically. I think that while there is social justice content on the Atlas Underground record in telling these social justice ghost stories, there's also the music itself. We're aiming to be revolutionary. I mean, I think that like the Public Enemy records that the Bomb Squad made, or the Clash albums, or John Coltrane, like it's when when you challenge the conventions of music in what you're playing, it challenges the conventions of society, and it opens the question of if you can play saxophone like no one ever has before, or guitar, or create soundscapes. It just is like, well, what other things could we possibly do outside of culture that haven't been thought of yet? that might improve the world.
That's interesting that you say that because music is often the message, or music is often the conductor to a larger message. And you've been doing this for so long.
Yeah.
You know, this is. I was going to ask this later, but I think this is a good time to ask it. You know, there's been a lot of talk about people should stay in their lane. Entertainers and sports performers should stay in their lane and not be so political. So sing or play football or whatever. Your career has been so much of speaking out and using your opportunity as a musician to speak out. What do you say to a musician, or what do you say when you see a musician like Taylor Swift who's on the fence of whether or not they should speak out?
Sure. Well, first of all, the idea that one should shut up and play guitar is only suggested by people who disagree with your point of view. Let's be crystal clear about that.
If they agreed with you, they would tell me more.
If the song says "Blue Lives Matter," they're like, right on, man. But they that's first, and then secondly, you do not abdicate your First Amendment rights when you pick up a guitar, or put on a football helmet, or have a show here. I think that it is crucial, certainly for me, and I would suggest to others, that not to leave your convictions behind in your vocation. And specifically with regards to, like me, I didn't really choose to be a guitar player. That chose me. That was a calling. I'm stuck. For better or worse, I'm stuck with that. And then it was my job to figure out a way to, these are the things I think, these are the things that I feel are right and wrong in the world, and this is what I do for a living, and I want those two things to harmonize and to have it be an integral part of the DNA of what I play is who I am. Now, specifically with regards to Taylor Swift, I would say, if artists, not just artists, I think it's wrong to ghettoize and say if artists have convictions, they should talk about them. If anybody has convictions in whatever their line of work, they should express themselves. But if artists censor themselves because they fear commercial repercussion, there's you only have so much of yourself to. I think there's a particularly hot ring in Dante's Inferno for those of you that that really believe something, but sacrifice who you are in order to make a little bit more money.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between someone who has the opportunity to lose a little bit of money and lose everything. We're having this conversation right now, and if I started, talking about my political views, there's a very good chance that my employer might say to me, "That's a cool story, Steve, but you got to go now." Like that. And so it's like you have to pick and choose when you can fight because and there are other people to pick up the fight to talk for you. Yeah. So that's a little.
And perhaps you should do some sort of on the side industrial sabotage or something.
Yeah, or get a podcast, man. That's really all it is.
Exactly.
I'll get a podcast where we can talk about it. Today, just kind of as a circumstance of politics and whatnot, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominated you for the second year. Does that mean anything to you?
Yeah, I think that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has come leaps and bounds in sort of recognizing how they're formed prior to the last 6 or 7 years. There were very few hard rock and metal bands in, and there's been a change in the weather in that, and so I'd be very proud to be inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
That's really cool because I remember the low point for the Rock Hall was probably about 7 or 8 years ago when Johnny Rotten basically shamed them and pointed out, "Oh, you're charging $25,000 for a table to show up to your own induction." But you would show up for your induction?
Yeah, definitely. I like the idea. As I grew up being a sporty lad, and the idea, if you're a baseball player and you have an incredible career, you aim to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame where you are recognized for that incredible career. I like the idea of that being true for the Rock. The one thing of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that it's each year they only let in 5 or 6 artists, and I saw the nominees for this year, and I it was 15 or so, and I would say 12 or 13 deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and it's a shame that only 5 or 6 can't be.
I have a shoot.
And I'll tell you, if now more than ever, is the time to rage against the machine, and the recognition of both Rage and the MC5 on the list, two explicitly revolutionary, artists are recognized in this regard, I think is telling.
Yeah, and
we'll see what happens.
Well, best of luck on that. And you say, maybe America needs a little bit more Rage Against the Machine. You wear a hat, and it's almost a little disorienting if you're not paying closely attention, where you wear a red baseball hat with white letters that say "Make America Rage Again." Have you got what's the weirdest response you've gotten to that hat?
I was on an airplane in Dallas, and it was actually during the election cycle. I had that hat on. It's a Prophets of Rage hat, and the lady says, "Oh, nice hat," and I said, look more closely. And she goes, oh, I don't like that at all. And I said, ma'am, the devil's in the details.
Do you ever think it would be important? Do you ever think it would be important, besides making America rage again, making rage again?
If a Rage Against the Machine show breaks out, count me in.
Dude, I would let me know when that happens.
You let me know. I'll be there. Yeah.
Tom Morello is our guest. Dude, an absolute pleasure. Best of luck on the rest of the tour and the album release. And we'll come back and see us again with something new, man.
Thank you for your thoughtful questioning. Appreciate it.
You got
Always
it.
good to be here in Philly.